He sang on a street corner for spare change, but when a woman in a limo stopped to listen, his entire world began to change. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The wind whipped down the city street, sharp as glass, turning every breath into a cloud. Daniel Carter adjusted the guitar strap on his shoulder, his fingers already stiff from the cold. He stood beneath the awning of a corner pharmacy just across from St. Mark's Children's Hospital, the chipped brick wall at his back, and the slow trickle of pedestrians in front of him. A faded flannel shirt hung loose over his thin frame, and his boots were scuffed from winters past. The only thing new was the small thermos of lukewarm coffee at his feet, brought by a kind nurse who always slipped out the side door during her break to check on him. He strummed a soft chord and let the sound settle. His voice followed, low, warm, cracked around the edges like a man who knew too much sadness and still chose to sing anyway. A few people slowed as they passed. Most didn't. Coins clinked into the open guitar case, but not many. Daniel's eyes kept drifting up. Second floor, third window from the left. The blinds were cracked just enough to let in the weak morning light. Somewhere behind that glass, his 8-year-old son, Leo, was hooked to tubes and monitors, fighting a battle far bigger than either of them deserved. Every note Daniel sang was for him. There was no stage, no applause, just the steady rush of traffic, the occasional honk, and the low hum of city life rushing past a man clinging to one last thread of hope. A woman in a charcoal coat passed by, then slowed, turning her head toward him. She didn't stop, just listened for a moment, her pace slowing. Then she moved on. It was always like that, people catching a piece of his soul, then disappearing back into the blur. He sang anyway. Not because it paid well, not because it changed anything, but because it kept him standing, because in some strange, fragile way, his voice was the only thing that hadn't broken yet. And on this freezing winter morning, Daniel Carter sang not to survive the cold, but to remind himself why he still had something to survive for. The engine purred quietly beneath her feet, barely audible beneath the hush of snowflakes brushing against the limo's tinted glass. Evelyn Roth sat back in the leather seat, legs crossed, gloved fingers tapping absently against her knee. Her assistant, Maddie, typed something on a tablet beside her, listing off calendar appointments in a low, professional tone, meetings with labels, scouting calls, and press obligations. But Evelyn wasn't listening. Her gaze had locked onto something, or rather someone, across the street. There, standing just beneath the pharmacy awning, was a man who looked like he didn't belong in this century, let alone this neighborhood. Flannel shirt, worn boots, a face carved by long days and longer nights. And yet, he was singing, not for an audience, not for fame, just singing. His voice floated through the winter air like smoke, raw, untrained, full of emotion no studio could ever replicate. Evelyn leaned forward, narrowing her eyes as she watched him. She knew talent. She'd built an empire on it. She could spot a fraud from 100 yards away, and even more, she could smell the real thing through a closed window and a fog of snow. This man was real. "Do you hear that?" she asked quietly. Maddie glanced up, confused. "Hear what?" Evelyn didn't answer. She just stared. The guitar was weathered, strings slightly out of tune, but the voice, that voice, was haunting. There was something bleeding from it, like sorrow with nowhere to hide. The limo sat still as cars passed around them. Evelyn barely noticed. Her world, usually so fast and unforgiving, slowed for a moment. She was used to boardrooms and ballrooms, talent shows and gala stages, but this was something untouched by ambition. She reached for the door handle. "Ma'am," Maddie said, alarm creeping into her voice, "you're due at the studio in—" "Cancel it," Evelyn said. Maddie blinked. "Cancel?" Evelyn stepped out into the cold without another word. Her heels crunched softly on the frozen sidewalk as she crossed the street, drawn not by curiosity but by something deeper. A voice had called her. Not through lyrics, not through performance, but through pain, shaped into melody. And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn Roth didn't feel like a CEO. She felt like someone who'd just heard a man pour his soul into the air and realized she wasn't above it. The wind hit her first, sharp and unapologetic, tugging at the hem of her coat and biting against her cheeks. Evelyn hadn't dressed for the weather. She never did. When you were chauffeured everywhere, winter became more of a backdrop than a reality. But now, standing on the sidewalk in heels far too delicate for the icy pavement, she felt the full force of the cold. Still, she didn't flinch. Daniel noticed her before she spoke. He kept strumming, his eyes flicking up, then back down. Another stranger. Another well-dressed passerby, probably stopping out of guilt or curiosity. He didn't pause his song, didn't ask what she wanted. He'd learned long ago that not every stare was worth answering. But Evelyn didn't walk away. She waited until the last chord faded into the morning air, then stepped closer, her voice low and measured. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" Daniel's fingers hovered over the strings. That wasn't the question he was expecting. Not, "Do you need help?" or "How much for a CD?" But that. He looked up, confused, cautious. "I didn't," he said, voice gravelly. "Just life, I guess." Evelyn studied him. No formal training, no industry polish. But the voice had depth most artists spent years trying to fake. And here he was, standing in the snow with calloused hands and a guitar that looked like it had seen as many winters as he had. "That's not nothing," she said, folding her arms. "Most people can't sing like that, trained or not." Daniel blinked, unsure how to respond. "You here to critique or—" She almost laughed. Almost. "No, I'm here because I think what I just heard is something special." He gave her a skeptical look, brushing a thumb over the worn fretboard. "Lady, I've had a lot of people stop and say nice things. Then they walk away. I don't need pity." "I'm not offering pity," Evelyn replied evenly. "I'm offering opportunity." He stiffened. "What kind of opportunity?" She stepped back slightly, giving him space, her breath forming clouds between them. "The kind you don't see coming, the kind that doesn't come back around." And just like that, something shifted in the air between them. Not warm, not trusting, but something just real enough to matter. Daniel didn't speak right away. He rarely did when someone asked about his music. Most folks just dropped coins in the case, gave a polite smile, and disappeared into their own lives. But this woman wasn't walking away. She was still there, coat dusted in snow, watching him like she saw something more than a guy with a busted guitar and a tired voice. He exhaled slowly, his breath curling in the air between them. "I sing out here because it's the only thing I got left to give," he said, voice low, steady. "My son's in that hospital. Room 214, leukemia." His jaw tightened. "We've been fighting it for a year, and fighting to keep the lights on even longer." Evelyn's face didn't change. No dramatic gasp, no forced sympathy. Just a quiet stillness, the kind that made Daniel keep going. "I pick up shifts when I can, cleaning, fixing things, hauling boxes. But most of the time, this is it. Singing outside and praying I make enough to cover one more copay. I don't have a sob story, just a sick kid. And bills that don't care." There was no performance in his voice, just truth, plain and unsweetened. Evelyn's eyes flicked up toward the hospital windows, second floor. She didn't ask which room, she already knew. "How old is he?" she asked softly. 8, Daniel said. "Smart, brave, too good for this world sometimes." He looked away for a second. "He used to sing with me, before the treatments made him too tired." Evelyn's hand brushed over the buttons on her coat, like she was grounding herself. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek black card, minimalist, embossed with her name in silver. "I want you to come in," she said, "to my company. Sing for me, just once. A private audition." Daniel stared at the card like it was written in another language. I'm not a professional. She met his gaze. Neither were half the people I've signed, but you've got something you can't teach, and I don't offer this lightly. Daniel didn't move, didn't speak. His fingers hovered near the guitar strings like they were holding him steady. He had no idea what kind of world she came from. But for the first time in a long time, someone was offering to open a door. The hospital room was quiet, except for the rhythmic beeping of the monitor and the soft rustle of the thin blanket clutched in Leo's hands. Outside the window, snow floated past like confetti in slow motion, blurring the outlines of the world beyond the glass. Daniel sat beside the bed, his guitar case leaning in the corner like a loyal companion, boots still damp from the sidewalk. Leo's face was pale, thinner than it should have been for an 8-year-old, but his eyes were bright with a kind of stubborn joy that no illness had managed to dim. He was propped up on a pillow fortress of his own making, a sketch pad on his lap filled with unfinished superheroes and scribbled lyrics. "Did you sing today?" he asked, voice faint but eager. Daniel smiled tiredly. "Yeah, same corner, same wind." "Any coins?" "A few," he nodded. "But something else happened, too." Leo looked up from his sketch pad. "What?" Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, like he was telling a secret. "A woman pulled up in a limo." Leo's eyes widened. "A real limo?" "Real as can be," Daniel said. "She listened for a while. Then she got out and asked where I learned to sing." Leo blinked. "Did she give you money?" Daniel shook his head. "No, she gave me something else." He reached into his coat and pulled out the sleek black card, placing it carefully on the bedside tray. "She wants me to sing for her company, really sing, like it's a real shot." Leo stared at the card, then back at his father, his lips curling into a tired but sincere smile. "That's wild." Daniel leaned back in the chair, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, wild." There was a silence between them, soft and warm. Then Leo whispered, "Maybe she's our angel." Daniel looked at his son, at the IV in his arm, at the strength it took just to sit up, and for a moment his throat caught. "Maybe," he said, voice hoarse. "Maybe she is." Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, for the first time in a long time, something felt like it was starting to lift. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a hallway bathed in sleek, modern lighting. Everything gleamed, glass, marble, chrome. Daniel stepped out slowly, clutching the black card in one hand, his other tugging at the sleeves of the borrowed blazer that didn't quite sit right on his shoulders. The pants were a size too big, cinched with a belt that had seen better years, and his boots, scuffed and fraying at the seams, clomped awkwardly on the polished floor. A receptionist with immaculate makeup and eyes like polished stone looked up as he approached. Her gaze swept him from head to toe. Daniel could almost hear the internal calculation. Unwashed, underdressed, out of place. "Name?" she asked, her voice neutral, but her brow arched just slightly. "Daniel Carter. I have an appointment with Evelyn Roth," he said, holding up the card like a shield. She took it, scanned it, then tapped a few keys. "One moment." Her fingers clicked across the keyboard. "You're early." Daniel nodded, unsure if that was good or bad. "I didn't want to be late." A silence settled between them before she gestured to a row of modern, white leather chairs that looked like they belonged in a spaceship. "You can wait over there." Daniel sat down stiffly, pulling at the blazer's sleeves again. Across the room, two men in designer suits whispered something behind their hands and chuckled. A young woman in heels glanced at him, then quickly looked away. He didn't blame them. He didn't look like he belonged here, but he thought of Leo, tucked under blankets, drawing superheroes with one shaky hand, and he held onto that image like armor. A door opened down the hall, and a man with a clipboard and a Bluetooth headset called out, "Carter? Daniel Carter?" Daniel stood, heart thudding against his ribs. "Follow me." As he walked down the corridor, voices echoed behind him, judging, doubting. But none of it mattered now. He wasn't here for them. He was here to sing. Not because it would make him famous, but because somewhere his son was watching the window again, waiting to hear that his dad had walked through the kind of door most men like him never got near. The studio space wasn't what Daniel expected. It wasn't grand or glamorous, just a wide-open room with too many eyes and not enough places to hide. Glass walls, exposed brick, and a single mic stand in the center like a spotlight, waiting to burn him alive. He stepped inside slowly, the soles of his worn boots muffled by the thick rug beneath him. A small group of executives sat at a long table off to the side, sleek suits, crossed arms, expressions carved from boredom. One man tapped absently on his phone, another whispered something to a colleague, not bothering to lower his voice. Daniel stood in front of the mic, heart pounding. He felt the judgment hang heavy in the air, the unspoken verdict that he didn't look like talent, didn't dress like it, didn't belong here. But then the door in the back opened. Evelyn Roth stepped in, black coat folded over one arm, her heels quiet on the hardwood floor. She didn't say a word, just gave him a small nod before taking her seat at the head of the table. The room stilled. Daniel closed his eyes, thought of Leo, of the window, of the nights he'd sung lullabies to his son just to drown out the sound of machines beeping. He placed one hand lightly on the mic, took a breath, and sang. The first note cut through the room like a blade, raw, imperfect, and full of something no vocal coach could teach, grief and hope living in the same breath. Every head lifted, every phone stopped. The man tapping fell still, the whispers faded. Eyebrows raised, some leaned forward, one even uncrossed his arms. Evelyn watched with a kind of still reverence, eyes narrowing not with skepticism but focus, the kind she reserved for the rarest thing of all, truth. Daniel sang like the world outside didn't exist, like no one had ever told him no, like every broken thing inside him had found a melody to live inside. And when he hit the last note, just a quiet, trembling hum, the silence that followed was so deep it felt sacred. No one clapped, not out of disrespect, but because they didn't want to break the spell. The silence stretched long after the final note disappeared into the rafters. Daniel slowly lowered his hand from the mic, unsure what came next. No one spoke. No one moved. He shifted his weight, glancing around the room like a man who'd just walked into a cathedral and shouted by accident. Then Evelyn stood. She didn't clap, didn't smile, just walked forward with deliberate grace, the hem of her dark skirt whispering against the floor. She stopped a few feet from him, the room still holding its breath behind her. "Follow me," she said quietly. Daniel didn't ask where. He just nodded and walked behind her, through a hallway lined with gold records and faces he didn't recognize. Her office was minimalist but heavy with power, floor-to-ceiling windows, dark oak shelves, a single framed photo of her shaking hands with someone important. She gestured for him to sit. "I've heard a lot of voices," she said, taking her seat behind the desk. "Technically perfect ones, studio polished, industry tailored. But what you just did in that room, that's not something I can find on a resume." Daniel sat stiffly, still in his ill-fitting blazer, feeling like the room itself could swallow him whole. She opened a folder and slid a document across the desk. "1-year performance contract," she said. 15 shows, studio access, a place to stay, full health coverage, and a check to help you get out from under whatever it is you're drowning in. He stared at the paperwork like it might bite him. "Just like that?" She leaned forward, folding her hands. "Not just like that. You still have to work, still have to show up, but I don't offer this unless I mean it." Daniel's throat tightened. He ran a thumb over the corner of the contract. "What's the catch?" Evelyn's eyes didn't flinch. "You don't sell your soul. You don't fake what you're not. You stay exactly who you are. That's the deal." He looked up at her, unsure whether to trust it. But in the background, Leo's pale smile flashed through his memory. The machines, the hospital bills, the nights he'd stayed up worrying about the next copay more than the next song. Daniel picked up the pen, hand trembling slightly. "Then I'm in." Daniel turned the pen over in his hand as if expecting it to vanish. The words on the contract stared back at him, heavy with promise and danger all at once. A 1-year deal, paid gigs, a furnished apartment, health insurance for him and Leo. It didn't feel real. It felt like a story he'd hear from someone else's mouth. Someone who got lucky. Someone who got seen. He looked up. "Seriously, no strings attached?" Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her eyes sharper than her voice. "There's always a string, but not the kind you think." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Then what kind?" She laced her fingers together. "This industry, it eats men like you for breakfast. The ones who walk in with real stories, real wounds. You'll be surrounded by agents, stylists, producers, critics, people who'll try to shape you into a brand. They'll dress you up, water you down, tell you what plays well in a headline." He nodded slowly. "And you?" "I don't care if your shoes match your coat," she said. "I care that when you open your mouth, people stop breathing." Daniel gave a dry laugh. "Not exactly how I imagined a music executive talking. I'm not most music executives. That much is obvious." She let that hang between them a moment, then added, softer now, "Just don't lose yourself, Daniel. That's the only catch. Hold on to whatever made you sing outside a hospital in the dead of winter. Hold on to your boy, your reason." He swallowed hard. That reason had been with him in every verse, every sidewalk chord, every late-night whisper to keep Leo asleep. And now it was stitched into a contract sitting on a desk made of wood worth more than his car. Evelyn slid the check toward him, an upfront advance big enough to buy him breathing room for the first time in years. Daniel didn't reach for it. Not yet. "I'm not good at pretending," he said finally. "Good," she replied. "We've got enough of that already." And in that moment, he believed her. The key card beeped and the door swung open with a quiet click. Daniel stepped inside first, still half expecting someone to stop them. The hotel suite wasn't just nice. It was the kind of place they'd only seen in commercials, on the TV, in the hospital waiting room. Plush carpet, soft lighting, a couch big enough for both of them to stretch out without touching, and windows that reached the ceiling like something out of a movie. Leo hovered behind him, his small hand clutching the handle of a beat-up duffel bag that held all their belongings. His eyes darted around the room, wide and cautious, like he wasn't sure if it was real. "Is this all for us?" he whispered. Daniel nodded, a little dazed himself. "Looks like it." They walked in together, Daniel tossing the duffel by the couch while Leo wandered toward the kitchenette, where a silver fridge quietly hummed. He pulled it open and let out a soft gasp. It was stocked. Juice boxes, fruit sandwiches, yogurt cups, even tiny glass bottles of chocolate milk. "Dad," Leo breathed, "they have real food." Daniel smiled, throat tightening as he watched his son's face light up like it hadn't in weeks. He moved toward the bedroom, pulled back the heavy duvet on the king-sized bed, and felt the warmth radiating from freshly laundered sheets. The heater hummed gently in the corner, casting a quiet comfort across the room. Leo followed him in, still holding a juice box, socks making soft sounds against the carpet. He stood at the edge of the bed, biting his lip. Is it okay if I call this home for a little while?" Daniel knelt down in front of him, brushing a strand of hair from Leo's forehead. "Yeah, buddy," he said softly. "Yeah, you can." Leo climbed onto the bed slowly, settling into the mountain of pillows like he was floating in a dream. Daniel sat beside him, silent for a while. He didn't know how long this would last. A year? A few months? But for the first time in what felt like forever, they had heat. They had food. They had a door that locked from the inside. And for tonight, that was more than enough. The suite had quieted into a hush that only comfort could create. The hum of the heater, the faint rattle of the city outside the double-paned windows. It all faded into the background as Leo drifted off to sleep, his breath slow and even beneath the thick hotel comforter. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, one boot still on, one off, the silence pressing gently around him. The suitcase lay open near the wall, half unpacked. From the inner pocket, wrapped in an old t-shirt, he pulled out a small wooden picture frame. The glass had a hairline crack in the corner, but the image inside remained untouched. Emily Carter, her smile soft, eyes full of mischief and kindness, her arm wrapped tightly around a younger Leo at the park, his hair wild in the breeze. Daniel turned it over in his hands, slowly. This picture had followed them through apartments, hospitals, motel rooms, through nights he couldn't sleep and days when Leo was too sick to smile. It was the anchor they both kept coming back to. He walked quietly to the nightstand and cleared a space, moved the hotel's brochure, unplugged the phone he wouldn't use. Then gently, he set the frame down. It stood awkwardly against the wall, but it stood. He stared at it for a long moment. "She'd want us to sing," he whispered. It wasn't just a thought. It was truth. Emily had always believed in his voice, even when he didn't. She used to joke that his lullabies were the only reason Leo slept through the night. She used to close her eyes when he played and say, "This is what peace sounds like." Daniel pulled the comforter up a little higher over Leo's shoulder, then sat back down and rested his hand on the frame for a beat longer. He wasn't sure what was ahead, but tonight his son was sleeping in warmth. There was food in the fridge, there was music waiting in his chest, and Emily, in her own quiet way, was still with them. Watching, listening, believing. The rehearsal studio smelled like fresh paint and old nerves. Acoustic panels lined the walls, softening every sound into something almost sacred. Rows of microphones stood like sentinels, and a sleek black piano waited in the corner, untouched. Daniel stepped inside, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his jacket, heart thudding in his chest like it was trying to escape. He wasn't alone. 3 backup vocalists chatted near the soundboard, each one stylish, polished, confident. A producer leaned over a mixing console, adjusting levels with the kind of casual precision Daniel had only seen in movies. Everyone seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Everyone except him. One of the vocalists glanced over, gave him a polite smile, then whispered something to the woman beside her. They laughed softly. Not cruel, just dismissive, like they didn't know what to make of the man in the thrift store jacket and beat-up boots. Daniel kept his head down, but the tension twisted in his stomach. Evelyn appeared a moment later, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the room before settling on him. "Glad you made it," she said with a small nod. "They're here to support you, not the other way around." He nodded, unsure if he believed her. The producer motioned him to the center mic. "Let's do a warm-up track. Sky in November, right?" Daniel stepped up, his throat dry. He glanced at the sheet music someone had left on the stand. All lines and symbols he never learned to read. But the words, they were his. He'd scribbled them down months ago on the back of a hospital bill. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and sang. The first line came out like smoke curling off a fire, low, uncertain, but real. The second found its footing. By the third, the room had changed. The vocalists stopped chatting. The producer looked up. Someone behind the glass leaned forward. It wasn't just his voice. It was the ache behind it, the hope, the memory of singing to a child too weak to open his eyes. By the time he finished the chorus, no one was whispering anymore. They were listening. And Daniel, nervous, untrained, full of doubts, wasn't hiding anymore. Leo's hospital room had become its own little world. Soft lighting, the quiet shuffle of nurses, the occasional beep of a monitor. The window overlooked the city, but Leo rarely looked out of it anymore. Instead, he spent most of his time curled beneath a blanket, sketching superheroes with crooked capes, or listening to audiobooks Daniel had downloaded onto an old tablet. Daniel came in and out, always tired, but always smiling. When he wasn't in the room, he was in the studio, singing songs that Leo said sounded like colors, warm ones, the kind that made you feel safe. And then Evelyn started showing up. She didn't make announcements, didn't arrive with fanfare. She'd appear in the doorway holding a brown paper bag filled with things Leo might like. A hardcover book about astronauts, a plush wolf with one floppy ear, a pack of pencils in wild colors that smelled faintly of strawberries. She never stayed long, just long enough. The nurses got used to her quiet presence. They nodded when she passed. Some of them didn't even realize who she was, just that she came in every other afternoon, always with something in her hands and something softer in her eyes. Leo didn't ask who she was at first. He just called her the nice lady. But over time, he started saving his sketches to show her, started asking if she'd read the new book to him just for a few minutes. Evelyn always sat in the chair by the window, never the bed, never too close. She read in a calm, even voice, one Daniel might not have recognized in the boardroom. Sometimes when Leo drifted off mid-story, she'd quietly set the book aside, tuck the blanket a little tighter around him, and slip out the door without saying a word. She never mentioned these visits to Daniel, because it wasn't about being seen, it was about watching, really watching, a child fight a quiet battle with more courage than most adults could muster, and doing what little she could to let him know he wasn't doing it alone. The camera wasn't supposed to be rolling. It was just a quiet moment between takes, a long afternoon in the studio when Daniel had stepped outside the booth to answer a video call from Leo. The producers had been testing lighting angles for an upcoming shoot. Someone left a camera running, no boom mic, no fancy setup. Just Daniel sitting on a stool, guitar resting on his knee, a phone propped up against a water bottle on the table. On the screen, Leo's face filled the frame, pale, smiling, his head wrapped in a soft knit cap. "Dad, he said, "can you sing the superhero song again?" Daniel chuckled. "You sure? I thought you liked that one just for bedtime." "I like it all the time." So Daniel strummed the opening chords. The room quieted, studio chatter fading to silence as he sang, not for a crowd, not for executives, but for one boy, curled up in a hospital bed on the other end of a screen. The lyrics weren't polished. The melody wandered, but the emotion? It was pure, undiluted. A father singing strength into a child who didn't have enough of his own. The clip, barely 2 minutes long, made its way to social media that evening. A sound tech uploaded it, thinking nothing of it. But by midnight, it had spread like wildfire, retweeted by celebrities, shared by nurses, stitched with tears and reactions from people halfway across the world. Single dad sings to sick son. You can feel the love in his voice. This isn't music, this is medicine. Evelyn's phone buzzed all night. Interviews, endorsements, TV spots. Everyone suddenly wanted a piece of Daniel Carter. And Daniel, he didn't sleep. Not because he wasn't grateful, but because for the first time his name was being echoed in rooms he couldn't control. Strangers commented on his life like it was theirs. People called Leo inspirational without knowing a single thing about his days filled with needles and nausea. Fame had arrived, loud, fast, unforgiving. And though Daniel still sang, he now carried something heavier in every note, the pressure of being more than a father, more than a voice. He was becoming a symbol, and symbols, he knew, didn't get to break. The hotel suite was dark except for the amber glow of the bedside lamp, casting long shadows against the walls. Daniel sat at the edge of the bed, hunched forward, elbows on his knees, a damp towel draped around his neck. His voice, once steady and rich, the thing that had carried him through hospital nights and street corners, was now a raw whisper, each word scraped thin. Leo was asleep in the next room, curled up beneath his favorite blanket, with the wolf Evelyn had given him tucked under his arm. Daniel didn't want to wake him, didn't want him to hear the rasp, the way he winced every time he swallowed. The days had started blurring, Rehearsals, interviews, studio sessions that ran too long, mornings that came too fast. Everyone wanted more. A new song, a viral soundbite, a late-night appearance. He hadn't said no, not once. Because saying no felt like slamming the door on everything he'd worked for. But now, it was catching up. The pain in his throat had started as a tickle. Then came the tightness. Then the swelling. When he finally saw a doctor, pushed into it by Evelyn, after nearly collapsing mid-session, the answer had come quiet and cold. You keep pushing like this, you could lose it. Permanently. The voice. The only thing that had saved him. The only thing that had brought him here. And now it was fraying. Evelyn stood in the corner of the hotel room, arms crossed, watching him like someone who'd seen too many flames burn too fast. She didn't scold. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just asked gently, "When was the last time you rested?" Daniel couldn't remember. He rubbed his temples. "They want me on a morning show next week, and then there's that benefit concert." She stepped forward. "Daniel, you need to stop." "I can't," he rasped. This is for Leo." Her voice softened. "Leo doesn't need a hero who breaks. He needs a dad who stays." The room fell quiet again. Daniel looked down at his hands, calloused, shaking. He'd fought too hard to get here, but maybe, just maybe, survival wasn't just about singing louder. Maybe it was about learning when to pause. The envelope sat on the hotel table like a live wire, thick cardstock, a gold-embossed seal, and a promise so big it made Daniel's stomach twist. Inside was a contract, 20 pages of polished words offering more money than he'd ever seen. A private home, a luxury car, a nationwide tour, everything he had once dreamed of, written in perfect legal prose. The catch? Leave Evelyn. Leave the originals. Ditch the raw, aching ballads he wrote for Leo in waiting rooms and parking lots, and swap them for mainstream hits. Catchy hooks. Love songs that rhymed cleanly. Pop singles built in boardrooms, not bedrooms. Daniel stared at the papers for a long time. The man who slid them across the table was all smiles and shiny teeth. "You've got a sound we can sell," he said, leaning back with casual confidence. "But we've got to shape it, hone it, make it palatable." Daniel looked up slowly. "Palatable?" "You know, broader appeal, something the charts will love. Think less pain, more polish." "And Evelyn?" The man didn't blink. "She's a stepping stone. You're the product." Daniel didn't say anything. He just closed the folder and pushed it back. "Is this a no?" the man asked, incredulous. Daniel stood. "It's not just a no, it's a never." He walked out without another word, our chest tight, throat still sore from the doctor's warning. He could have had more exposure, more money, more fame. But at what cost? He remembered Leo's small voice, asking for the superhero song, the way Evelyn watched him sing, not with dollar signs in her eyes, but with something closer to belief. Back in the hotel room, Leo was waiting with a drawing in hand, a picture of Daniel on stage, cape and all, microphone in one hand, and Leo on his shoulders. "You look cool, Dad," Leo said, grinning. Daniel knelt beside him, voice low. "You know what's cooler?" "What?" "Not letting anyone tell you who to be." He folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into his guitar case. He didn't want to be a product. He wanted to be a father who never sang someone else's song. The city skyline glittered outside Evelyn's office, distant lights flickering like promises made too easily. Inside, the floor-to-ceiling windows reflected a woman trying to hold her composure. She stood still, arms folded tightly across her chest, jaw clenched. Her assistant, Maddie, hovered by the door, hesitant to speak. Moments earlier, Evelyn had walked past the conference lounge, unnoticed, just as the rival label's rep had slid that gold-embossed envelope across the table. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. But when she heard Daniel's name, she stopped. When she heard the offer, leave Evelyn, ditch the originals, play the part, she felt the air leave her lungs. She didn't wait to hear his answer. She didn't want to. Instead, she walked back to her office slowly, like each step was heavier than the last. She said nothing to Maddie as she entered, just poured herself a drink she didn't touch and stared out at the world she had helped build, wondering if it had all been for nothing. Maddie finally broke the silence. "You okay?" Evelyn didn't look away from the glass. "If he chooses them," she said quietly, "maybe he was never meant for this." Maddie shifted uncomfortably. "You don't believe that." "I don't want to believe it," Evelyn whispered. "But I've seen it happen too many times. People with real hearts, real pain, they start out honest. But the industry doesn't reward honesty. It rewards shine." Her voice cracked on the last word. She turned, wiping at her eye, quickly, almost angry at herself for letting it happen. "He reminded me," she said, her voice barely holding. "He reminded me why I started this in the first place. Not for charts, not for power, but for people who had something to say and no mic to say it into." Maddie stepped forward. "Daniel's not like the others. He wouldn't leave you." Evelyn managed a bitter smile. "You'd be amazed what people leave for a number on a check." She sat down slowly, her fingers pressing against her temple. "I should have prepared for this." But deep down, she hadn't. Not with Daniel, not with the man who sang like he was praying. And, for the first time in years, Evelyn Roth let the tears fall. Not for herself, for the boy, for the music, for what might be lost. The hospital room was quieter than usual. The machines hummed softly, their beeps spaced wider apart, as if even the electronics knew today wasn't for noise. Leo lay propped up by a mound of pillows, his small frame thinner than ever, skin pale beneath the overhead light. A knit cap covered most of his head, but his eyes, though tired, still held their familiar glow. Daniel sat beside him, one hand resting on Leo's blanket, the other scrolling through old videos on his cracked phone. Footage from before all this, before the contract, before the cameras. When it was just him, a sidewalk, and a guitar that never needed tuning because there was no one to impress but the sky. Leo pointed suddenly. "That one. Play that one again." Daniel tapped the screen and the video began to play. A younger, more worn-down version of himself filled the frame, hunched over his guitar on a snowy street corner, flannel shirt open to the cold. His voice came through the tiny speaker, gritty, uneven, alive. A stranger's hand dropped a coin into the case. He smiled, kept playing. Leo watched, transfixed. When the video ended, he looked up at Daniel, brow furrowed in thought. "You sound happier there," he said quietly. Daniel blinked. "What?" "In that video, you sound lighter." Leo's voice was soft, barely above a whisper, like you're singing, just because you want to. Daniel didn't know what to say, and because Leo was right. The fame, the contracts, the pressure. It had started to shift something in him. He'd traded open streets for closed studios, late-night lullabies for early-morning makeup chairs. He hadn't written a new song in weeks, not really, not the kind Leo used to ask for at bedtime, not the kind that made people stop and feel. Leo leaned back into his pillows. "I like those songs better, Dad, the ones you sang to nobody." Daniel reached over and gently squeezed his son's hand. "Me too, buddy." He stared at the frozen frame of the video on the phone screen, his old self, smiling under a sky full of snow. And for the first time in weeks, Daniel remembered who he was before all this noise. The hotel room was silent, wrapped in the soft breath of sleeping hours. The city outside had long since quieted. No horns, no footsteps, just the occasional distant rumble of a late train weaving through the dark. It was 3 a.m., and Daniel sat alone in the living room, hunched over his guitar, a notebook open beside him, blank but waiting. He hadn't touched the guitar in days, not really. Studio sessions had become exercises in precision, not passion. The producers wanted polish. They wanted hooks. They wanted tracks that could sell, but not tonight. Tonight it wasn't about any of that. Tonight it was about Leo. Daniel strummed gently, the sound muted against the plush hotel carpet. A minor chord, then a soft shift. His fingers knew where to go before his mind did, like the music had been living in his chest, waiting for a crack wide enough to escape. The words came slowly at first, hesitant, fragile. You don't need to fly to be brave, don't need a cape to save the day. You don't have to smile when it hurts, you just have to stay. He paused, the pencil trembling slightly in his grip. He could hear Leo's voice in his head, asking him to sing just one more before bedtime. Those nights in the hospital when Daniel would sit beside him for hours, the melody more medicine than music. He wrote more, when the world feels too heavy, and sleep doesn't come. I'll sit by your window and hum till it's gone. The chorus wrapped around him like a whisper. You're my reason in the quiet, my sunrise in the fight, and if all I can do is love you, that'll always be enough tonight. Daniel blinked, surprised by the wetness in his eyes. This wasn't a song for the charts. It wouldn't trend. It wouldn't make a label exec nod. But it was real. It was honest. It was the kind of song only a father could write for the boy who gave him back his voice. He strummed it through once, soft enough not to wake Leo, and when the final note faded into the dark, he whispered, "This one's yours, kid." And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like himself again. The rooftop was quiet, lit only by the golden spill of street lamps below, and the faint glow of stars smudged into the night sky. Wind danced around the edge of the building, tugging gently at Daniel's sleeves as he tuned his guitar with careful fingers. Evelyn stood a few feet away, her coat buttoned against the cold, arms crossed not in judgment, but in something softer, something close to worry. Daniel didn't speak at first. He let the silence settle between them like a blanket. Below them the city pulsed, cars moving, lives unfolding. But up here, it was just the two of them. No cameras, no contracts, no expectations. He strummed a chord, then another, the same ones he'd played in the hotel room, in the dark, while Leo slept 2 rooms away. This time, they stretched open into the sky. I wrote something, he said finally. Not for a show, not for a label. Evelyn nodded once. For him? Daniel looked up, the corner of his mouth lifting. Always. And then he played. No spotlight, no stage, just a man and a guitar, his voice low and rough around the edges, carrying the weight of sleepless nights and bedside promises. The words poured out, Leo's strength, his laughter, the ache of watching him fight what no child should have to. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't rehearsed. But Evelyn didn't blink once. She didn't move. She just listened. When the last chord faded into the night air, Daniel sat back on the bench, the guitar resting in his lap. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said softly, I didn't come here to be famous. Evelyn met his gaze. I came to stay whole. She breathed in slowly, the wind lifting strands of her hair. Then let's protect that. Starting now. Daniel gave a quiet laugh, not bitter, just tired. Not sure the industry knows how to protect anything. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice firm. Then we'll teach it, or we'll burn it down, trying. They stood in the quiet after that, not as artist and executive, but as two people who knew the cost of survival. And on that rooftop, Daniel found what he hadn't known he was looking for. Someone willing to fight for the version of him that didn't need to change to be worthy. The envelope on the table looked different this time. Not cold, not corporate, just clean white paper, folded neatly, placed beside a fresh cup of coffee Evelyn had brought in herself. Daniel sat across from her in the private meeting room. No lawyers, no assistants, just two people, and the thin line between trust and risk. Evelyn didn't push the paper toward him. She just sat back, hands folded, eyes calm. I reworked the deal, she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You didn't have to. I did, she replied. Because I believe in the version of you that sang on a rooftop, not the version this industry wants to shape you into." He hesitated, then reached for the papers, flipping slowly through the pages. He skimmed the headers, terms, royalties, show schedules, and then paused. His finger landed on a section halfway down the page. Creative rights, retained. Tour schedule, artist determined. Health care coverage, extended to dependent, Leo Carter. Lifetime. His breath caught. He looked up at her. Evelyn, this isn't how the business works." "No," she said, it's not. People don't give creative control to the new guy. And they sure as hell don't promise medical coverage for his kid until forever." She didn't blink. "I'm not people." Daniel leaned back in his chair, papers trembling slightly in his hand. "Why?" "Because what you're doing isn't just music," she said softly. "It's honest. It's necessary. And if I don't protect that, then I'm just another suit looking for a paycheck off someone else's pain." He stared at her, the weight of it all pressing against his chest. "Leo's got years of treatment left. We still don't know if—" "I know," she said. "And that's why this matters. You don't have to choose between saving your son and singing your truth." The silence between them stretched, thick with everything he didn't have words for. Daniel set the papers down slowly, not with hesitation, but with awe. "You believe in me," he said, as if still testing the shape of those words. Evelyn nodded. "And I'm betting everything that I'm right." The door creaked open, and for a second, neither of them moved. Daniel stood on the threshold with one hand on the knob, Leo tucked close to his side, small fingers gripping his dad's jacket. The apartment smelled faintly of new carpet and fresh paint, clean, quiet, untouched. A sunbeam stretched across the hardwood floor, and a breeze drifted in from the cracked kitchen window. It wasn't grand, it wasn't big, but it was theirs. Leo took the first step inside. He wasn't wearing his hospital bracelet anymore. No IVs, no wires, just a knit cap, his favorite sneakers, and a breath that came easier than it had in months. "Is this really it?" he asked, wide-eyed. Daniel stepped in behind him, dropping their 2 duffel bags by the door. "This is home now." The place was simple. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, a couch that still had the tag on it. There were boxes that hadn't been unpacked yet. A hand-me-down table Evelyn had somehow tracked down. A guitar leaning in the corner next to a sketch pad Daniel had picked up for Leo that morning. The fridge buzzed softly, stocked with food that didn't have to be counted by dollars and dimes. Leo wandered toward the back window and peered out. "We have a tree," he whispered, grinning. "An actual tree in the backyard." Daniel watched him, heart caught somewhere between joy and disbelief. It had taken a year of late-night songs, hospital visits, paperwork, exhaustion, and more tears than he cared to admit, but they had made it. Not to the top, not to some fantasy mansion, but here. To safety, to breathe. To a place where Leo could wake up without a nurse checking his vitals, and Daniel could finally exhale. Leo plopped down on the couch and looked up at his dad. "Can we stay here forever?" Daniel smiled, walking over and dropping beside him. He pulled Leo close and kissed the top of his head. "Yeah, kid, we can stay." And in that quiet, ordinary room, without applause or spotlights, a boy came home. And a man finally let himself believe they were going to be okay. The folding chairs in the elementary school gym squeaked under the weight of fidgeting parents and restless siblings. Bright construction paper banners lined the walls. "Spring Showcase," spelled out in uneven block letters, flanked by glitter-glued stars and music notes drawn in crayon. The scent of floor polish and popcorn lingered in the air. Daniel sat somewhere near the middle, knees bouncing, hands clasped too tightly in his lap. He wasn't used to this kind of stage. He'd played rooftops and rehearsal rooms. He'd sung on sidewalks where no one clapped, and in studios where everything echoed too perfectly. But this was different. Because tonight, Leo was performing. The lights dimmed slightly, just enough to make it feel official. A teacher with a clipboard stepped up to the mic and offered a nervous introduction. Our next performer is Leo Carter, singing an original song by his dad, Daniel Carter. There was polite applause, then silence. Leo stepped onto the stage, a little unsure, a little smaller than the other kids, but standing tall anyway. He wore a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up just like his dad used to. His knit cap was gone now, his hair, still growing back, stuck up in every direction. He clutched a wireless mic in both hands like it was the only thing anchoring him to the ground. Then he sang. His voice was thin, still finding its strength, but it carried. It carried through the awkward acoustics, through the shifting chairs and cleared throats and phone cameras rising in slow waves. The lyrics were familiar. Daniel had written them on a wrinkled napkin in a hospital cafeteria. Once upon a night, he didn't think Leo would see another sunrise. But here he was, singing them, singing him. Daniel felt the tears before he could stop them, not dramatic, not showy, just quiet warmth running down his face, his hands covering his mouth as he watched his son stand beneath the lights and offer the world a piece of their story. No viral cameras, no studio magic, just a boy and a song, and for Daniel, it was the greatest performance he had ever seen. The morning was quiet, unusually so. A soft breeze drifted through the open kitchen window, stirring the scent of pancakes and fresh coffee. Daniel stood at the stove in a faded t-shirt, flipping the last round of batter, while Leo sat at the table, hunched over a crossword puzzle, tongue sticking out slightly, in concentration. It was their new rhythm, simple, sacred, untouched by the noise that used to define their lives. Then came the knock. 3 short raps, polite, unmistakable. Daniel wiped his hands and opened the front door, expecting maybe a neighbor, maybe a delivery. Instead, there it was again, the limo. Parked quietly against the curb, black and gleaming, like the first night their lives began to change. And stepping out, just as composed, just as striking, was Evelyn Roth. She wore a gray coat, her heels sharp against the sidewalk, but her eyes were warm, softer than Daniel remembered them ever being. He stepped onto the porch, confused but smiling. "You lost? Or just nostalgic?" Evelyn smirked. "Neither. I came with a question." Daniel crossed his arms. "You don't call first anymore?" This one needed to be asked in person. She motioned for him to walk, and they did, down the driveway, onto the sidewalk, just far enough for privacy, but close enough to hear Leo's laugh through the open window. "I'm launching something new," she said. "A foundation, music therapy, youth programs, pediatric support, the kind of places where art and healing overlap." Daniel's brow lifted. "And?" "And I need a song," she said, stopping. "A real one, not written by a committee in a glass tower. One with heart, with history, with purpose." Daniel chuckled. "And you thought of me? I never stopped thinking of you." They stood in silence for a beat. "I want you to co-write it," she added. "Your words, my platform. We'll take it to the world." Daniel looked back toward the house, toward Leo's laughter and the music that lived quietly between their walls, then back at Evelyn. "You sure you're ready to let the world hear something that real?" Evelyn smiled. "That's exactly why I came." And in that moment, he didn't feel like a charity case, or a viral fluke, or even a rising star. He felt like a man being trusted to help shape something that mattered. The first time they performed it live, the room was filled with more suits than smiles. Industry giants, medical leaders, press with cameras perched like birds ready to pounce. But when Daniel stepped onto the stage, guitar in hand, and Leo walking beside him in a tailored blazer 2 sizes too big, the crowd fell into a hush that felt deeper than reverence. It felt like respect. The anthem didn't begin with fireworks, no dramatic swell or flashy choreography, just a quiet chord and Daniel's voice, steady, low, familiar. "Hold on, little light." Even when the sky forgets to shine, Leo stood beside him, not singing yet, just watching. Then, on the second verse, he joined in, his voice higher, still fragile, but carrying something that could not be taught. You're the reason we believe. You're the fight in every line. When they reached the chorus, the screen behind them lit up with faces. Children in treatment centers, nurses in quiet moments, parents clutching hands through hospital nights. Not actors, not stock footage, real lives, real stories. By the time the song ended, the audience was silent, not because they were stunned, but because they knew applause wasn't enough. That night, the foundation raised millions. Donations poured in. Entire wings were funded. Therapy programs launched in cities that had never seen music as medicine. The anthem went viral, not for its production, but for its truth. Daniel and Leo became more than a father and son. They became a symbol, not of tragedy, but of quiet strength, of what it meant to keep singing when the world handed you silence, of what it meant to show up when it hurt and still give something away. But Daniel never let it become a brand. He refused to let Leo be packaged, refused to let the pain become performance. They did interviews sparingly. They smiled, they showed up, but always on their terms. Back home, they still cooked pancakes on Saturday mornings, still folded laundry together, still wrote songs late at night on the couch with one guitar and a pen that sometimes ran out of ink. Because the anthem had saved more than hospitals and foundations. It had saved them. It had been one of those nights that pressed down like wet concrete. No calls back from job applications, an eviction notice folded in Daniel's coat pocket, and Leo sleeping on the couch with flushed cheeks from a fever that wouldn't quit. The fridge had hummed its final breath 2 days earlier, and the last carton of milk had gone sour before morning. Daniel sat at the edge of the bed, guitar case open beside him, not to play, but to pack it away. The pawn shop downtown stayed open late on Fridays. He had run through every option in his mind, each one ending at the same place. This guitar, the only thing left that held any value. Everything else was borrowed, broken, or already gone. Music had kept them afloat longer than it should have. But food didn't come from melodies. Heat didn't run on chords. He rested the guitar in the case slowly, like he was tucking in an old friend for the last time. He was halfway through latching it shut when a small voice came from the living room. "Dad?" Daniel turned. Leo stood in the doorway, pale and bundled in his blanket, hair stuck to his forehead. "I couldn't sleep," he mumbled. Daniel cleared his throat, hiding the emotion rising too fast. "You okay?" Leo nodded, then hesitated. "Can you play me just one more song?" "Just one more." Daniel stared at the closed case. The pawn shop could wait one more night, couldn't it? He opened the latch again, pulled the guitar onto his lap, and sat back down. Leo curled beside him on the couch, head against his dad's arm. Daniel played soft and slow, letting the room fill with something warmer than heat. The same lullaby he'd sung since Leo was a toddler, when life still had space to breathe. By the time Leo was asleep again, Daniel had made up his mind. He wasn't selling it. He'd sell his coat, his boots, the TV, anything but this. Because if his voice was the only thing he had left to give, then he'd keep giving it, one song at a time. The ballroom shimmered with polished crystal and soft candlelight, a sea of tuxedos and evening gowns drifting beneath chandeliers like reflections in a lake. Cameras flashed in timed bursts near the entrance, and laughter echoed like champagne bubbles, sharp and weightless. It was the annual Art and Humanity Gala, and tonight, Evelyn Roth was the guest of honor. She stood near the back of the room, quiet and poised, a glass of water in hand, watching the room rather than commanding it. That was how she preferred it. Observation over spectacle, presence over power. The MC took the stage, voice booming with practiced charm. Tonight, we honor a woman whose vision changed lives, the woman who discovered Daniel Carter, who saw not just a voice, but a soul, and gave it a platform. Applause rang out, sincere and generous. Daniel sat at a nearby table, suit slightly rumpled, Leo beside him grinning wide in a clip-on tie. Evelyn gave them both a knowing glance before stepping up to the microphone. She didn't read from a script. She didn't need to. "I've been called a talent scout, a CEO, a strategist," she began. "But tonight, I want to make something clear." The room leaned in. "I didn't discover Daniel Carter." A soft pause. "I didn't mold him. I didn't invent his sound. I didn't pluck him out of obscurity like some prize on a shelf." She turned slightly toward him, her voice steady and sure. "All I did was listen when the world didn't." A hush spread across the crowd. He was already singing. In the cold, in the chaos, in the places nobody wanted to stop for. But I did, and what I heard changed me. She placed her hand lightly on the podium. "So if I'm being honored tonight, let it be for that. Not for shaping someone's story, but for stepping aside so he could tell it." Daniel blinked hard, shoulders tight with emotion. Leo clapped first, small hands, loud sound, and the room followed, not just for Evelyn, but for the truth of what she'd said. Sometimes being the first to believe means being the one who refuses to look away. The album dropped at midnight, without a countdown, without a flashy rollout, without any choreographed dance videos or viral teasers, just a quiet post on Evelyn's platform that read, "No polish, no filter, just Daniel." Beneath it was the cover, simple, black and white. Daniel seated on a wooden stool with Leo's old sketch pad resting at his feet and his guitar in his lap. The title read, "Still Here." No capital letters, no gimmicks, just truth. By morning, the music world was buzzing. Critics didn't know what to do with it at first. The industry hadn't seen something this stripped down in years. No auto-tune, no layered vocal stacks. Just one take, one room, one man and a guitar that still bore the faint dent from years of sidewalk weather. Each track was recorded live, most of them with Leo in the next room coloring or listening, or sometimes humming along. The reviews rolled in fast. A miracle of imperfection. The kind of album that doesn't just tell you a story, it sits beside you while you remember your own. More prayer than product. The track list wasn't long, 11 songs, most under 3 minutes, one titled 214, named after Leo's old hospital room, another called Porch Light, written at 3 a.m. on the hotel balcony after a sleepless night. And then there was one more song, which Daniel recorded while Leo lay curled in a blanket across the studio floor, unaware the world would soon hear the lullaby that once saved them both. It didn't top the charts in the traditional way, but it broke the mold. It was streamed by exhausted nurses on night shift, played at candlelight vigils, used in classrooms, in therapy groups, in quiet moments when no one had the right words. It didn't explode, it endured. Daniel didn't tour right away. He didn't throw release parties or do press junkets. He stayed home, with Leo, writing, living, breathing again. Because Still Here wasn't about climbing, it was about surviving, and somehow, against all odds, reminding a loud, distracted world that sometimes the softest voices carry the most weight. The invitation sat unopened on the kitchen counter, wedged between a stack of hospital receipts and a coffee-stained lyric draft. It had been there for 3 days. Heavy cardstock, engraved lettering, official and shiny in a way that made Daniel uneasy. The Americana Music Awards nominee, Best Breakthrough Artist, Daniel Carter. He hadn't touched it. Tonight was the ceremony. Leo lay curled on the couch, a light cough tugging at the edges of his sleep. The week had been rough, low fevers, fatigue, a new round of meds that made his appetite disappear. Daniel had already decided he wasn't going. An award wasn't worth leaving him, not even for one night. He was rinsing out a mug when his phone buzzed. "Evelyn." "You're going," she said as soon as he answered. "Not tonight," Daniel replied. Leo's stable. You said it yourself. And this, Daniel, this isn't about you." Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose. It feels wrong, like I'm celebrating while he's watching, she cut in gently. From the couch, with tissues and ginger ale and his superhero blanket, waiting to see his dad walk up and take the thing they never thought he'd even be nominated for. He went quiet. Daniel, she continued, voice soft now, tonight, let him see you win. Daniel glanced over at Leo, who blinked open, tired eyes and offered a half smile. Was that Evelyn? He mumbled. She still bossy? Daniel laughed, the sound catching in his throat. Yeah, a little. You should go. Daniel sat on the edge of the couch. You sure? Leo nodded. Bring me back something shiny. 2 hours later, Daniel walked onto the stage in a second-hand suit Evelyn had quietly tailored to fit him. His name had just been called. The applause was loud, but all he heard was one small voice in his mind saying, "Just one more song, Dad." He took the mic, looked out at the sea of faces, and kept it simple. This is for the kid watching in pajamas, who made me believe again. And somewhere, under a blanket on a couch, that kid smiled. Because he saw it. He saw everything. The lights above the stage were blinding, a halo of white cutting through the dark sea of the audience. Cameras flashed like stars trapped mid-blink, and somewhere in the back of the grand auditorium, a screen displayed Daniel's face. Humble, quiet, not quite used to the weight of so many eyes. The presenter had just finished saying his name, voice booming through the hall. Applause rose, sharp and genuine. And yet, as Daniel stepped forward, award in hand, everything blurred except for one image in his mind, Leo, tucked under a blanket, on the living room couch, the remote in his hand, a bowl of popcorn half-eaten at his side. Daniel didn't bring up producers. He didn't thank the label. He didn't read from a list. He walked to the mic, let the silence settle, and said just one sentence. This is for the boy who made me sing again. And then he stepped back. No fanfare, no dramatic pause, just truth. A truth so small and so heavy that it fell like thunder in the room. The applause didn't swell right away. People were still catching their breath from how little he'd said and how much he meant. Somewhere backstage, Evelyn exhaled. Hands clasped, eyes misted. She knew this wasn't a moment Daniel had craved. It was one he carried for someone else. That line wasn't for the crowd. It was for the couch, for the boy, for the memory of a night when Daniel had been ready to give up, and a voice half asleep had whispered, "Just one more song." And now, standing under the hot lights of success, Daniel wasn't asking for more. He was giving thanks for what he already had. A reason, a song, and the boy who gave it back to him. The sign went up on a Tuesday morning, simple white letters carved into reclaimed wood, mounted on the brick exterior of a modest corner building, just blocks from where Daniel had once sung on the street for spare change. People walked by without knowing what had been there before. But those who knew stopped. Leo's Light Studio. No press release, no ribbon cutting, just the quiet reveal of a name that meant everything to the people behind the doors. Inside, the space was warm, sunlight filtering through wide windows, shelves lined with second-hand instruments, notebooks stacked in crates, walls covered in scribbled lyrics, and photos of kids mid-laugh, mid-verse, mid-belonging. The heart of the place wasn't its equipment. It was its people. Evelyn stood by the front desk that morning, watching the staff unpack a shipment of donated guitars. She looked different here. No heels, no boardroom, just boots and a denim jacket, her hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up. She hadn't spoken much about the renaming, hadn't made a show of it. But everyone knew this had been brewing for months. Daniel walked in with Leo at his side, the boy's hand clutching a new sketch pad, his energy returning more each week. He stopped when he saw the sign. "Is that really what it says?" Leo asked, eyes wide. Evelyn nodded. "I figured it was time the world saw what your light really did." Daniel looked at her, stunned. "You named the whole thing after him?" "After what he represents," she said. "Second chances. Voices that deserve to be heard. the kind of hope that makes people get back up. Leo turned to Daniel. Does that mean I'm like part of it? Daniel knelt beside him. You are it, kid. Later that day, a group of teens, shy, unsure, full of stories no one had asked to hear, filed into the studio's new writing room. No expectations, no pressure, just a place where being raw wasn't a flaw. Leo's light wasn't about polishing people into stars. It was about finding the ones who were already shining and giving them a space to burn brighter. The stage lights bathed them in a golden warmth, soft and slow, like sunlight at the edge of dawn. Years had passed since Daniel last stood under a spotlight this big, but tonight wasn't about comeback or a career. It was about something deeper. Beside him stood Leo, now taller, steadier, his voice no longer thin or tentative but full, rich with a quiet power that had been earned, not taught. The benefit concert had drawn a packed house. Celebrities, donors, doctors, kids in the front row wearing Leo's light shirts and clutching toy microphones. But the only person Daniel saw was the boy beside him, the one who once asked for just one more song in a tiny apartment when everything felt like it was falling apart. The crowd stilled. The room held its breath. Leo looked at his dad and gave a small nod. Daniel strummed the first chord. The song they had written together was simple. No sweeping string sections, no pyrotechnics. Just verses built from the memories they had stitched into music over the years. Hospital nights, street corners, quiet kitchen mornings with pancakes and promises. We didn't have much, but we had sound, a little hope, a thread to hold. When the world said no, we still sang loud and made a home out in the cold. Their voices joined in harmony on the chorus, Leo's brighter, Daniel's deeper, the two weaving through each other like water and sky. It wasn't luck that got us here, just hands held tight through every storm. And if the world forgot our names, we'd still be home, safe and warm. The final note held longer than expected, as if neither wanted to let it go. The hall was silent, not out of politeness, but awe. As the sound faded into stillness, the crowd remained hushed, breath caught in their throats, hearts heavy in their chests. Then a single clap, then another, until the entire room rose, the ovation crashing like a wave. Daniel turned to Leo, eyes glassy, and smiled. They had sung through pain, through fear, through the ache of a story that could have ended 100 different ways. But love had the last verse, and the crowd didn't just hear it, they felt every note.